Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about Commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz, and I'm joined by my fantastic co-host. In light of the upcoming Spider-Man and Magic the Gathering crossover, he would like to remind you all that with great power comes great irresponsibility. It's Dana Roach.
I got to meet the guy who invented Altoids this week. He gave a speech thing at my local college. It wasn't like that interesting, but he did make a mint.
All right. I'm glad that you're staying fresh and on top of your dad jokes here, Dana. Oh,
imagine having that for your claim to fame. Like that would be all right if that's like if that was your marketer. Like I invented Altoids, made a bunch of money. Like that's kind of a bro being bro moment there. If that was your claim to fame in this world.
Listen, it'd be cooler than having a Magic the Gathering YouTube channel as your claim to fame. Absolutely. Just if we can get real self-deprecating here.
Absolutely.
No humor like self-deprecating humor, right? Anyway, Dana, it's you and I on this episode. What are we chatting about today?
We're talking about the embarrassment of riches that is currently the state of Commander.
Yeah, you put this idea forward, and I am so fascinated by this concept, and I'm really excited to get into it with you. There is kind of this saturation point that it seems that we've hit with a lot of different types of card designs in Commander and how many options there are for those. And so you've got a whole bunch of examples that you wanted to put forward and to chat about the number of options that we have to put into Commander decks and the ways that makes deck building sometimes easier, but also more difficult at the same time, which is really confusing and weird. So, dude, let's get into it. Yeah, let's talk about the embarrassment of riches of Commander designs.
Well, so the first place I really noticed this, or one of the first places, I had a Talran Sky Summoner deck that I just recently took apart. Casting instant sorcery spells, making drakes, attacking people with drakes. It was a token deck. My win con was hitting people with tokens. Mm-hmm. So when I first built that deck, and we're talking like 12 years ago now when I first put that together, Coastal Piracy was an easy include. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to an opponent, I draw a card. So I'm going wide. I'm going to put in Coastal Piracy, hit people with 6 tokens, draw 6 cards that will hopefully be a bunch of instants that I can cast to make more drakes and then draw more cards.
Right.
Well, then we got a Bite into Thassa in that first Theros set. Like, well, now I have 2 of those. Well, that's going straight in that deck too, so I can have twice as many chances to get that card. And then there was a reconnaissance mission. I think that was an Ikoria, in Kindred Discovery. That draws a card when that creature type enters play as well and when it deals combat damage. And then we got Locker Room and The Indomitable and Enduring Curiosity and Ultimacia. And there's a point where you don't need 12 of those effects. A couple of those effects are good, but you hit a saturation point where there are too many tools. And that's a new thing. That wasn't, for the most part, a thing, 10 years ago, 6 years ago. I don't know when you hit it, but that's kind of new to Commander. When you really get into some specific tools or archetypes, once upon a time, we had to run bad versions of things to hit that effect. That's not the case today.
No, it ain't. Yeah.
You are cutting bombs to find room for this slightly different bomb.
Yeah. You and Matt literally made an episode a short time ago about why it is harder to tune up decks now. And this kind of echoes back to a little bit of those same sentiments.
Yeah.
Of you're not cutting a card that's a C to make room for a card that's an A. You're cutting an A to make room for an A plus is much more the vibe nowadays. Right. And this is one of the reasons why.
Yeah.
And especially with that example, that's such a strong example because all of those are different versions of card advantage for that type of deck where you're making these evasive tokens, you can draw lots of cards. But as you said, you're not going to run all of those.
Right.
Especially because while you need a lot of card advantage in that deck for sure, you don't want all of your card advantage to be hitting exactly the same note. Those are good to press your advantage and get a lot of cards off of the presence of a battlefield that you've established, but you also want some of your card advantage spells to be the kind of things that help you get established even from when you're behind, if you have nothing in play, things like that. So you do need a little bit of variety amongst your card advantage, so you can't play all of those as good as they are, so you have to be choosy about which ones make the most sense for that deck specifically and such like that. But it's not just coastal piracy effects. Right. This trend that you're noticing applies to a lot of different types of card effects out there, a lot of various archetypes of card out there, and we want to go through a couple of different examples of those throughout this episode to see how many options there really are and why it can be tricky to find the ones that are the most suitable for you and what you're doing.
It's kind of fascinating because in a way, it's for a lot of these effects, it's kind of a safe thing. Like, you don't have room for all of them. So once you turn that corner, then it becomes almost safer to make more of them because you're at the point where people can run. People have hit that kind of plateau. Well, I've got 4 of them in my deck. 5 of them is too many. It doesn't like do what I want it to do.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's 7, whatever. Like whatever that number winds up being. Like there's a number where it's too many of those things. And from a design perspective, well, then you can make them because you're not, the decks aren't getting more powerful because you're taking something out and putting a slightly different variant that is maybe better in your deck, but is maybe universally better. So like not everyone's making the same swaps, and it's you personalizing something for your playstyle or your build or something. From a design perspective, it's actually kind of interesting, I think.
I really appreciate that observation. It is true. This is these are areas where it is clearly safe for Wizards of the Coast to continue plumbing and exploring and expanding upon those areas, because there are so many of them already that there's no way that you can play them all. To an extent, I feel this is a strong example for the thing that people often say about is this good in Aristocrats? A very common thing that you'll hear, because there are so many cards that are good for Aristocrats decks.
Right.
There are so many versions of Blood Artists out there. When a creature dies, ping something or drain life from each opponent, from Vindictive Vampire all the way to a bunch of Warhammer Sanguine Priesty stuff. There are so many options for that type of effect. But I can't overload my deck with just those. And I probably could fill out a commander deck with just those. And that would cause me to neglect the other types of things that I need in that deck, like card advantage or like mana acceleration or removal and things like that. So that is clearly the type of area that Wizards can continue to create more and more versions of, because them adding more to that pool is just another drop in the bucket. It doesn't tip the scales any which way because there's already so much on the scales.
Yeah. It's just such an interesting change from the days of Magic, circa 2014, 2015 or so, when we were first kind of starting to seriously pay attention to it. The composition of decks and the amount of tools you have today to fill those slots versus what we had back then is really, really interesting to see that shift.
Well, Dana, I'm really excited to get into even more examples of this trend with you. But real quick, we have a couple of shout-outs for our sponsors that we want to get to first.
We are excited to be teamed up with Dragon Shield. I just got a couple of boxes of their new non-glare sleeves in. I put them on my newest deck, and they are amazing at keeping the harsh overhead lights you see in most game shops from making your cards unreadable. They work really, really well and keep your cards safe. And if you click on the link in the description below, you get 5% off any Dragon Shield product. It makes your purchase cheaper and it supports the show. So protect your deck like a dragon.
This show is also brought to you by our patrons over at patreon.com/EDHRECast. This show could not happen without all of you. And to show our thanks, we have great perks over there on Patreon, including access to our Discord where you can chat with us, maybe find a game, or access to the Challenge the Stats spreadsheet that shows all of our challenges over the past years. If it makes sense for you to support us this way, we appreciate it so much. And if you want to support us in totally free ways, you can do that too. Liking, subscribing, sharing with your friends, leaving us a podcast review, all of that is huge. And one final thing, every episode we like to shout out one of our fantastic patrons. So this week we would love to heap some praise on Cal Bratt. Cal, thank you so much for being a patron. You make this show possible.
Cal Bratt is actually just a great name. Just in general, that's a fantastic name.
Cal Bratt Summer right there.
Yeah. So getting back into this here, one other area this has really jumped out at me lately is with token doublers. So like doubling season, once upon a time, you're playing a token deck in green. I mean, ignoring the crazy price in that card for a whole lot of years, but that was an auto include, right? Like if you're making 4 tokens, you're making 8. That's game changing in a lot of different token decks. And then we got parallel lives, and then we started seeing more of those, Anointed Procession, if you happen to have access to white, Mondrak. At this point, however, we are at so many token doublers, you can't run them all, nor is it useful to do so. Yeah. Because you need to have the tools, like you said. And that was a good point you made earlier. Like, you need to have things that get you to that point.
Right.
To get the tokens in play, to double them, to get them in play, to draw cards off the Coastal Piracy effects or whatever. There's a saturation point where you can't run all of them, and I think token doublers are very much at that place right now.
I mean, even just sticking to white, they've gotten a whole bunch of them. You mentioned Mondrak, Anointed Possession, stuff like that. But there's also the new Elspeth Stormslayer, a planeswalker who has a passive token doubling effect on it too. There's the brand new Exalted Sunburn. I'm sorry, I mean Exalted Sunborn. I will always make that mistake. Listen, I learned how to do murders at Karlov Manor. I learned Asmarana Kamartika Dyson Okultikar. I will never be able to learn Exalted Sunborn. I won't be able to keep that in my head. I just super one. But yeah, that one also a new token doubler effect from EOE. And O'Hare Talk as well came out, which is a token tripler. That you're lousy with options, literally, as you said, an embarrassment of riches. And those are all enhancers that can make your game plan really pop off. But I don't need 12 enhancers in my deck.
Right.
I probably don't even need 3 of them. So I do have to be very choosy about which ones I'm going for and why. Do I want the Anointed Procession because it is the lowest of the mana costs from among those? Do I want the Elspeth because in addition to it doubling your tokens, it also can provide some tokens along the way, but it is more fragile and attackable? I have a lot of choices that I have to make, and that makes me have to hyper scrutinize every single one of these options to figure out which one fits the best for my particular purposes and why.
Yeah. And again, we mentioned this before, that's a good design place to be in. When doubling season is an obvious auto include, that's less interesting than forcing you to have to choose what works best for your deck. Because you get that situation with doubling season now. Doubling season doubles counters too. And if you aren't running a deck that cares about +1 counters or something, most of the other, Parallel Lives as well, it costs less mana to cast. The other ones oftentimes cost less. So you're kind of paying on doubling season for utility you're not using.
Right.
So there are situations where doubling season isn't worth running in some decks, token decks, and that's insane. Who would have thought?
Or at the very least, not worth the cost, because it's still a crazy expensive card, and I'll go for a thing that's easier on my wallet for sure.
Absolutely, 100%. But yeah, that's a situation where once upon a time you were always considering, if you had one, you were going to be strongly considering it for your deck, assuming the speed of the game was one where you could afford to play it. There's exceptions for those kind of things, but
right.
It's just no longer the auto include, assuming you meet all the criteria to want to run it. And that's new. That's a new thing in this game. And it's good. It's healthy for everything, I believe.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And to specifically hone in on the counter doubling aspect of that, even in that realm where your deck doesn't care about tokens at all, you just care about counters.
Yeah.
Lordy, there's so many versions of that too.
Yeah.
I'm just going to rapid fire here. Branching Evolution, which is doubling your counters, but for 3 mana. Corpse Jack Menace has been around for a while. That's a creature that does the same thing, but it is in Golgari, so you have something that could wear those counters as well. Loading Zone is a new one. Vorinclex Monstrous Raider is a 6 mana one that is doubling your own counters and then also shrinking other people's counters. There's the Earth Crystal, which also reduces your green spells. And there's the Innkeeper's Talent, which has other abilities of giving out counters and granting you ward and stuff like that along the way towards getting to its final ability to double your counters. I am out of breath. Oh my goodness, there are so many versions of these types of effects, which is awesome. But when I am playing a counter doubling deck, I'm looking at all of those and also all of my other effects like Hardened Scales that just increase my counters by +1. And I'm like, I'm lousy with so many options. And if I do play too many of these, I will forget to even put cards into my deck that put a +1 counter on something in the first place in order for that counter to be doubled up. So, yeah.
If it was the year 2015 and the Earth Crystal was in one of the Theros sets, that's a $75 card, and every person who has a +1 counter deck is trying to get a hold of one and busting out their binder back when people had binders to trade for cards on Commander Night to try to get an Earth Crystal for their +1 counters deck. And people greeted it with a shrug. Right. Card.
Yeah.
But we've got 15 other things that do that. You just named the permanents that do it. You didn't even name any of the instants or sorceries that double the counters on things.
That's true.
Right? So not that people liked the Earth Crystal, but the splash it makes today compared to what it would have made when there was only 2 other cards that did the same thing, which was not that many years ago, is just fascinating to me.
Yeah. I almost wonder if this would be a particular subject that is better to save for the end of the show, but I am going to pose it here. Do you ever feel when we are given this embarrassment of riches, when we have all of these options, do you feel any level of apathy towards new designs? Do you think when those new ones come out? Because I think that if there is any danger to this type of trend, it is that we lose some excitement for things that used to really thrill us. Do you feel that way, or is that not necessarily a concern for you? Are you just happy with having so many myriad options?
Yeah, I think there's the fact that we get so many sets nowadays. I think does lessen the impact to a degree. So I think it's a combination of those two things. We get so many sets, and because we get so many sets, they just have to double up on design. There's just not enough space to not do that. But I don't feel apathetic about it. No, I find it interesting. It's like, oh, okay, now I have to make a choice and choose something. And I think it just makes for more interesting brewing than it was when you automatically would have included doubling season in that Selesnya token stack.
Cool. That's good.
How about yourself?
No, I would say that I feel the same way. I think that there is certainly a thrill to something when it is a bit more rare, but therefore that also puts a lot of like hyper demand upon that thing in the same way.
Yes.
That can also be its own version of dangerous. So we do have so many options that it can all start to, in your head, kind of blend together a little bit. Us being constantly in a state of preview seasons for brand new sets that are always coming out, for instance, does kind of muddle the brain, at least speaking personally, and it becomes a little bit harder to get super excited for any individual one. But at the same time, when I find one that really sings to my soul, that really hits exactly what I know that deck wants to hit, then I do feel that I still have the excitement there. But I just wanted to pose that question because it is, if there is a consequence that could occur from trends like these, that's one I wanted to be aware of. But it's nice to see that we're both still feeling like pretty groovy with it. I'm happy to just like check in, make sure all seems all right.
Yeah,
cool, all seems all right. It's nice to have the options, and it's not making us feel worn down by them.
No, not at all.
There is also kind of another funny consequence to this too. I think we had mentioned earlier that this is clearly a safe design space for Wizards to continue dabbling in. And I think nowhere is that more apparent than another thing that you've put in here as a space that Wizards can return to, and that we have a sort of a saturation point. And that's more or less like 7 mana plus green and mythic beaters. Like Nyx Bloom Ancient, Cultivator Colossus, the Ancient Adamantoise is a relatively new one that explodes into a bunch of treasures. There's the EOE card, Famished Worldsire, which can like eat your lands and find new lands and things like that. These are especially ones that like give the benefit that the 7 mana creature gives you is even more resources, which is kind of hilarious. Some of these cards have been met with like huge like, oh no, this is way too powerful. Especially there was a lot of hubbub around Nyx Bloom Ancient. But there are so many of these options that I think relatively they all come off as, again, not making as big a splash as perhaps they were projected to make. So again, to your point, they feel like safe areas to continue designing in, no?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think one thing that helps with that too, like again, back in my day, I'll be doing a little bit of that because that's, the reality is the game has changed a lot. But back in my day, 10 years ago or so, people would crack that cool green mythic, that World Spine Worm or whatever it was, and they would put it in their commander deck because, like we said, there weren't enough tools. People would just put that generically good splashy card in their deck. I don't know if that happens at least as much as it used to, for sure. People are running cards way more often than not, that work for the specific plan their deck has. You're not seeing people having to like spackle over holes in their list with that cool green mythic. So I think you don't see them. Like, you will see them if that green mythic happens to work with the game plan of that deck. But I think people, by and large, they're powerful. No one's going to deny, that cool splashy green mythic in every set is super strong. But I think people aren't running them because it doesn't lend itself to what the deck is doing.
Yeah.
Is that have you experienced that, do you think?
Yeah, you can't afford to just have a generic big beater. Yeah. And not only that, there's also like a mana curve dependency on this as well. Like, you can't have too many of a 7 mana huge creature in your deck because at a certain point your opening hands are going to be real tough. Right. So there's also that aspect to it too. So it's kind of like oversaturated on 2 different axes, which is also interesting to observe. Also, Dana, I was drinking at the time you said that super funny thing about back in my day. So curse you for that, because I nearly spat water all over my camera, at which point things would get really downhill real fast.
I was trying not to crack up as I'm watching you on the camera respond.
No, I will make sure I am off screen for that, because it was very embarrassing. And you know what? Further to that point, I'm going to stop you from being able to make me do a spit take any further by transitioning us to Challenger Stats real quick.
All right, that works.
We got to take things seriously, Dana. There's so much data on EDHREC that we don't always agree with. So let's move to Challenger Stats real quick before we get back to even more of these examples. This episode is brought to you by Archidekt, the very best Commander deck building website. We house all of our decks on Archidekt, which you can find linked in all of our episodes, or go to archidekt.com/EDHRECast. And by now, you've probably heard of my favorite feature on Archidekt, dragging and dropping directly from Scryfall or EDHREC right into your deck list, saving you tons of time on typing out your card choices when you're updating your list. And you probably also know that Archidekt's playtester is the very best in the biz, smoothly starting each new turn with a swift draw and untap, easily grouping and tapping things en masse if you need it, making searches and scries super simple, proliferating a bunch of counters with just one click of a button, and more. But did you also know about its playtester logs feature? Archidekt can track stats during your playtests, noting such data as your number of cards drawn each turn or number of mana producers played each turn, so you can see how often you're hitting your land drops or how many extra cards that you draw, and on what turns you're most likely to start drawing extra cards. I just playtested a +1 counters deck to see how much total power it could accrue on the field, and Archidekt tracked for me that I got up to 48 power by turn 6. Such easy access to a detailed recap of your playtests can help you get in tune with how your deck really works, or help you locate its weak spots, and all those little edges and extra bits of knowledge could make all the difference to make you more successful at your next game night. Check out our decks at archidekt.com/EDHRECast, that's archidekt.com/EDHRECast, and thanks again to Archidekt for constantly innovating and for sponsoring the show.
So my challenge this week is for the card Energy Tap. It is a blue sorcery that costs a single blue to cast, and it says tap target untapped creature you control, and if you do, add an amount of colorless mana equal to that creature's mana value. This was used in a game I played recently. A friend of mine has a Brutaclad deck and cast it tapping Brutaclad for 6 colorless mana, and then cast, I think it was a Mere Battlesphere that they would not have otherwise been able to cast on that turn.
Nice.
Making a bunch of tokens, doing a bunch of gross Brutaclad stuff, and killing the table. That's ridiculous. And I was like, man, how have I never seen Energy Tap before? And his response was like, I've literally never attacked with Brutaclad before, so I might as well tap it and get 6 free mana. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So I did some looking. It's in just 10,000 decks on EDHREC, and so I'm like, okay, what blue commanders would really shine with this? There's a bunch of blue commanders that are crazy mana value. Pride of Hull-Clade is 11 mana. You can tap that for 11 off Energy Tap. Eris, Roar the Storm is 10. Octavia is 10. There's a lot of stuff in blue that you aren't necessarily going to be attacking with, and getting a 1 mana ritual making you 10 mana is insanely useful later on in the game. Yes, it's not going to ramp you head off a Dark Ritual, but if you're not attacking with your commander and you have access to blue, consider it in one of those decks with a high mana value, especially if you have a lot of colorless effects. But even if you don't, if you're getting 11 mana off Pride of Hull-Clade, do you care if you don't use it all? That's so much mana. So Energy Tap, it should just see more play.
I like that. And it's funny that you picked a blue card for your challenge here, because I've got our listeners submitted challenge coming to us from our Discord user who goes by the name Riceboat. And this is also a blue card that they're submitting as underplayed, and that is the card Leadership Vacuum. They put it forward as an underrated removal piece in general for blue decks. And to give you some numbers on Leadership Vacuum real quick, that is the 3 mana blue instant where target player returns each commander they control from the battlefield to the command zone, and you draw a card. It's currently showing up in 12,900-ish decks, might be 13,000 by the time that it gets by the time this episode airs, but that is roughly 0.4% of all blue decks that are eligible to play it out there in the format. I will speak from personal experience here. Riceboat, I completely agree with you that this is an underrated removal spell, because I am frequently on the receiving end of a Leadership Vacuum because my little brother plays this one, and I really like playing partner decks, or decks where there's a background. So you have 2 commanders because the background enchantment counts as your commander. And having both of those things return to your command zone in one fell swoop with a 3 mana spell that doesn't even target those things, so it doesn't matter if they have Hexproof or Shroud or not. And it draws you a card along the way, just a little bit of salt in that wound. This is a really good spell. If you're not the type of person to go with Imprisoned in the Moon effects because it feels a little bit weird to pin someone's commander down to the battlefield for sure, I definitely recommend this as an alternative, and it's a super budget and very unexpected way to really muck up someone's game plan. When I have to pay 4 mana for my folk hero background to come back, it feels really, really bad. So I highly recommend using this, and frankly, it's the kind of card that I've been looking at and considering I should probably put this into a few more of my own blue decks because it really can be very efficient at getting around things like Ward and Hexproof and such like that. So, Briceboat, thank you so much for the suggestion. And to my little brother out there who I know is watching, Cody, I love you. Please stop leadership vacuuming me. It's really effective, but I'm also really proud of you because it's such a great move every single time.
And Challenge Stats is brought to you by Cardsphere, the best way to turn your unplayed cards into played cards. Edge of Eternities just came out, and the Friday night of the first pre-release, I kind of on a whim put a list of cards I wanted up on Cardsphere. I had 17 of those cards on their way to me when I woke up Saturday morning, and probably half of them were at my house by Commander Night that week, like 3 days before they were officially released. So I had my decks upgraded before cards even came out from people just sending me stuff from their own local pre-release. That's an amazing turnaround, and like, you should be using Cardsphere just to get cheap cards faster than anybody else. Go to cardsphere.com/EDHRECast and check out our favorite way to build decks fast.
All right, so Dana, getting back into it, we've mentioned a couple of examples so far where if you do sort of overshoot the mark, so to speak, on the number of those types of effects that you have in your deck, it's not the end of the world. You know, it's not that bad if you have multiple of, let's say, counter doublers in play, because if you do have a Branching Evolution and a Corpsjack Menace and another one, as soon as you do put a counter somewhere, like one counter is going to become 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, like that's really exciting. So if you do have a whole bunch of those in your deck, you know what, it still could make for some really cool plays. But let's talk now about a type of effect that you don't want to have too many of in your deck, where it can actually be a much bigger deal if you do misconstrue that balance or overshoot the mark in some ways.
Yeah, so Haste Enablers is the one that jumps to mind here. And Fervor and Anger have been around for a long time and have been kind of a, particularly, years ago, staple in Red. You want to give all of your stuff Haste. Red was one of the, no one else really, other colors had access to that effect. Giving the entire team Haste, just kind of changing the math on what's going on in terms of attacking. So you would maybe want to stack a couple of those effects. But when the effects don't work together, the ceiling is then even lower with how many you want in your deck. And like once we started getting things like Hammer of Purphoros, and the first Urabrask, and like now recently Enduring Courage and Fire Crystal, you can maybe get away with having 5 Coastal Piracies or 5 or 6 counter or token doublers because they work together. When you draw that that Fervor or that Rising of the Day, when you already have an Anger in your graveyard or a Hammer of Purphoros on the field, that doesn't help you at that point. Like that card is dead. So when effects don't work together, then the ceiling becomes even lower with how many you want to run.
Yeah, I sort of would also apply here, like equipment that grant double strike.
Yes.
Are very, very effective, especially for like a Voltron deck. And to an extent, even like certain equipment that grant protective effects to make sure that your Voltron is untouchable as well. But you hit diminishing returns on those real fast in that type of deck because having 3 instances of double strike doesn't do a dang thing. And you do need, you want every equipment that you put onto a Voltron to give it a unique new ability that will make it easier for you to take down your opponents rather than hitting the same beats over and over again. And especially with the Haste Enablers, lordy will you feel that really, really fast. It is nice when some of them grant a little bit of extra spice on top of it. Rising of the Day gives you that +1/+0 for some creatures, or Urabrask can also make your opponent's creatures come in tapped, but they also have various fragilities to them in addition to each of that. So you're weighing those upsides and those downsides, and you probably don't have room to hit all of those things. You do have to be super choosy right from the off, because unlike some of the other examples, if you miss the mark on this and you draw 3 of those in a single game, you're probably going to be a little bummed out by it.
Which I think is a kind of a good skill test to a degree, or test as a brewer, right? You have to like make that determination. It's much more interesting to have to find that balance, at least it is for me, in my deck with what is the right amount of these where I have some redundancy, but I'm not running too many cards and creating like a dead card situation. That is a much more interesting thing in brewing than it is, I'm just going to add all of them.
Yeah.
And I think it makes for a better environment for everyone in this game.
And we did kind of hint a little bit ago with the 7 mana green mythic creatures as well about how like mana curve can also be another axis of this. I think that will also apply to another example here. We love mana rocks. We love the 3 mana rocks on this show. There are some that have amazing benefits for you, from Cursed Mirror to Hourglass of the Lost to Misleading Signpost to Crowded Crypt. Like there are a whole bunch of those that can provide a lot of really cool extra effects. But there are a lot of folks out there who are very dubious about 3 mana rocks because of the tempo that they represent compared to a 2 mana rock that you could play instead, which often will fit a little bit more neatly with your commander's curve. Let's say your commander is 4 mana. You'd probably want to play a 2 mana rock that lets you then play your commander right afterwards on the very next turn, compared to having to wait one more turn with a 3 mana rock. Totally understand. So there is therefore a limited number of 3 mana rocks that you probably should put into a deck. We're still very actively excited about a lot of the spell type effects that we get on 3 mana rocks, but it is the kind of like we temper our own excitement there. We love them, but we don't play all of them that we could because we still appreciate the tempo that comes from those other 2 mana rock options that we have. So that is another one where it's just like, if I do overload the number of 3 mana rocks that I have, I am probably setting myself up for more failure than I am success over the grand scheme of how long I'm going to play that deck.
Yeah, again, like with the coastal piracy effect, where like I would add that in addition to the other.
Yes.
There was a time when this Midnight Clock comes out. Well, I'm just going to take this one Fellwar Stone out of this deck and put Midnight Clock in. Okay, it's 1 more mana, but I think the upside of being able to, a couple turns later, be able to draw 7 new cards is worth it. It's worth that minor tempo hit or maybe having to delay playing my commander 1 turn for the upside. And that's an easy swap. Well, that's not necessarily how it works anymore. Right. When there's multiple good 3 mana rocks in that space, now I'm no longer looking at pulling out that Fellwar Stone and it's like, oh, it's just one slightly more expensive mana rock. Now I'm like, okay, well, I already have Midnight Clock in here. What am I taking out? If I take out another 2 mana rock, then like, now I've got, 3 or 4 of these in my deck. And like now that's really changed the tempo of your deck, right? Swapping a single 2 mana rock for a 3 mana rock really on average doesn't impact very much. Once you're getting up to like 2 or 3 or 4 of those in your deck though, you feel that. And so again, you're forced to make choices, which I think is a good state for the game to be in.
Totally agree. I feel this way, as long as you're talking about 3 mana rocks, I think we should probably also talk about various versions of removal. In my mind, the next most logical thing to get to would be like 3 mana removal spells, because that feels like such a dense field out there. And I have noticed myself playing fewer and fewer of those types of effects over time, particularly after the introduction of Ward to so many legendary creatures a short time ago. Once you start piling on Ward 2, Ward 3, whatever, and my 3 mana spell goes to a 5 mana spell or a 6 mana spell, which could be Wrath territory for me instead, it feels I'm a lot harder pressed to play a lot of those various types of removal spells, and I keep on wanting to gear all of my removal towards the 2 and 1 mana versions as much as possible, the very famous Paths and Pongifies and stuff like that, which has left things like Mortify and Utter End and all of that very far on the wayside for me over time, which I have mixed feelings about, but it just feels like I have to respond to the way that the commander has evolved by adjusting where not just my mana rocks fall on my mana curve, but also all of my removal spells too.
Well, this just came up with Edge of Eternities because we got the card Emergency Eject. So 2 and a white, destroy target non-land permanent, and its controller makes a lander token. That's a very good effect, except for it's now competing with Stroke of Midnight and Generous Gift. And when Generous Gift first came out, I added that into almost every white deck I had.
Over the moon, yeah.
Yeah. And then Stroke of Midnight came out, and I'm like, oh, I can afford to run 2 of these. That's useful to me. And now we just got Emergency Eject. I'm like, oh, I don't think I want 3 of them. Right. That's too many of these.
Sure.
2 was fine and very, very useful. 3 is too many. And that's... Again, so because 3 is too many, that means they're perfectly fine printing a 4th and a 5th and a 6th and a 7th down the road. Yeah, because you are then forced to make choices versus just hard jamming all of them.
Well, I mean, to also go to like the Utter End example, I can't remember the last time I put Utter End into a deck. That's the 4-mana Orzhov spell where you exile target non-permanent. But like also before that, to back in my day, you as well, there used to be Vindicate that we were kind of over the moon for as well. Vindicate with sorcery speed, destroying target permanent. I can't remember the last time I played a Vindicate. Sorcery speed is such a restriction on that. But then we got, what was it, Anguished Unmaking as well, which I was really excited about. I'll exile something and lose your life. That's fine with me. But again, I can't remember the last time that I played an Anguished Unmaking now either. So it isn't just like, 3-mana removal. I feel like also the colors that these removal spells often fall into has a huge thing to do with it. Like if you're playing an Orzhov deck, you are just so lousy with options, and I just don't think it's smart for you to play all 25 removal options that there are available to you in these colors. It's just so many different things, and you do kind of got to slim that down. 25 removal spells probably won't make your deck hum quite as well as it could.
Like there was a time, and I'm totally, no one's going to believe me that this was something someone once said. I had a friend of mine in a game shop 8 years ago or whatever, legitimately say, yeah, man, I really want to Vindicate for this deck, but like I don't want to spend the $20 on it. I'm hoping the price drops. Yeah. It was a $20 card, and like he really wanted it for his deck because it was a better option than anything else. Mm-hmm. Vindicate is in a card that like 3/4 of our listeners don't know what that card is, let alone Utter End. Like that's how much that's changed. And to a degree, it's power creep, but like it's also power creep, and then power creep hits a point where it's a plateau, and it's it's just now fracture or dispark, which where you're like, well, yeah, maybe it works in my deck, but it's not. Oh, I want to save up to buy this because it's such a huge improvement over the other option I'll be running instead of it.
And I do appreciate about removal spells specifically, you'd made a great point earlier about like you do have to be very considerate of which of these feels the most correct for your deck, given your deck's unique proclivities. But with removal, you have to see which of those is best for your deck, given your opposition on average. What is it that you are most likely to see? Are you running up against a lot of enchantments that your deck will be very, very weak to? Or are you most afraid of creatures or artifacts specifically? Is Despark worth running because the things that you believe you are weakest to are going to be high mana cards that Despark will remove? Or are you more afraid of things that are a little bit lower down on the ground and you would like a more efficient way to be able to nuke those as well? So it forces you to consider not just what am I doing, but also what am I weak to and what are they doing? So that's another area of like seeing all these options and finding opportunities to level up.
Well, so here's one I think you'll appreciate, Joey. And I wonder if you can pinpoint when this happened. Okay. There was a point in time where if a new card was released and it contained the words, zombies you control get +1/+1. That was an auto include in your zombie deck. In like, zombie players were excited to get another zombie lord. That's not a thing anymore where like that's an auto include. There are so many of those creatures that do that. Do you remember when that point was where you're like, yeah, I can't run all these?
Oh my word. I would say, good Lord knows that when Aetherdrift happened, I was already like, emotionally, I got tired of them. Sure. Right? I was like, I'm bored.
Well, and the math is annoying too. You're like, my zombies are all getting what now?
I don't have an easy way to pinpoint that, but that is a great example of this, Dana. I love that.
But yeah, it happened. I recall there was a point, like I remember when once upon a time, that was a thing where people were excited. I got another zombie lord. Amazing. It's going right in this deck. I need to get one. And that's unremarkable today. That is not a thing that's an auto-include.
It's like, we got another zombie lord.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It occurs to me talking about some of these, I sort of feel like over the course of this conversation, we've sort of discovered that there are two types of oversaturation points that we're noticing. You could sort of say that one of them is this, there are just so many options that a newcomer doesn't really make that much of a splash, a la these zombie lords. Like there's just, there's so many of them, it'll sort of blend right in with the others. But then going to the removal example, I feel like there's probably another type of saturation point where there are so many options, but we also know that certain ones are already the king of the hill, like Path and Swords will not be unseated. So them the Wizards designing more cards into that type of space is pretty safe because the king staples will never be unseated from that position. Right. So one of them is just a sheer equal level density, and another one is like, there's already some king of the hill type of cards here, and both of those reflect a way that is safe for Wizards to continue expanding that type of design.
So how about situations where maybe we don't want to see a saturation of effects? Is there anything that occurs to you where you're like, I don't know if we want more of these. I feel like the amount we have is safe, and when we get more, then it becomes a problem.
Which areas are not super crowded that they should not oversaturate?
Yeah.
I like this question. Where do I think Wizards should proceed with more caution? Frankly, lots of areas, but let's hone in here, Joseph. To kind of go back to your example with Challenge of Stats, you would put forward a card that was a little bit ritual-y. I think ritual areas, those spells that will give you a huge burst of mana all in one, are probably my first instinct here. Like Dockside Extortionist was a menace for a lot of reasons, especially because of how much mana it could give you immediately that you could then save in the form of all those treasures. But like, frankly, even a Mana Geyser also gets a game kind of off the rails in some instances. So further experiments in the good rituals area, to me, strikes me immediately as being like hey, let's proceed with a lot of caution here rather than going ham and printing a lot of various things like that. I wouldn't want rituals to have the Zombie Lord treatment or the Coastal Piracy treatment. I think that's my first instinct there. What about you? I love this question.
So I think there's two different kinds of things I think of here. Goad is a mechanic that I love. Mm-hmm. And I love seeing someone drop a goat effect in a game. And I despise someone dropping 10 goat effects in a game.
Uh-huh. And by someone, you mean me. I understand.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I'm guilty of this.
Sure. Because there's ways now to loop goad that wasn't really a thing when goad first got released. Mm-hmm. But even if you're not looping it necessarily, if you just have access to a dozen goad effects, it makes it really easy to turn the game into one where players feel like they are no longer in control of what they're doing, and that's not a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And first of all, that never occurred to me that goad could work that way when we first got the first 1 or 2 or 3 goad cards, because it was such a rare thing to see. It was only available in a few slots. But as we've got more of them, we've gotten into a situation where it's easy to loop it or just hit a saturation point where it makes games unpleasant. And I'm concerned as they print more and more goad that it's going to become easier and easier to just bake enough of it into a deck to like make it so you just don't have that kind of agency anymore.
Totally makes sense. I think in general, also like 2 mana commanders are just like Wizards. We don't need that. Like let's ease off the gas pedal. There is another big thing that sticks out in my head as well. Like Sithis, why?
Yeah, the one that jumps out to me is Kinnan.
Sure,
is, 2 mana for what it does is crazy.
Yeah, and then of course we've already regularly criticized the over-reliance on Ward that appeared on a lot of commanders for a long time. Though that appears to me to be a lesson that Wizards certainly learned.
Yes.
Which, good, because they needed to, because that was one that was a little bit too, the use of Ward was a little bit too frivolous on plenty of designs as well. So I'm glad to see that has been eased off as well. Those are other areas where I'm just like, oh yeah, please not more. But that is something that applies very much to like legendary creature design compared to stuff in the 99. And there are plenty of other options.
The other one that jumps out at me, and I think competitive players might also agree with me, and that's free spells.
Oh, of course. Yeah, no, you win. That's correct. Yeah.
In particularly counter magic, I think jumps out, or at least good free spells in terms of counter magic. Mm-hmm. Like in Commander, you can kind of be like, oh, you got me with that Fierce Guardianship. Okay, you got me. Mm-hmm. Now I know that maybe you have a Force of Will, but like, what are the odds you have it in your hand? If you then have access to like 3 or 4 variants on free counter spells, where then I can't play around you, right? Like, cause I can't be like, okay, I've ran you out of mana. I've done something to like put you in a position where you can't respond. Well, you still can because it's free.
Right.
Like 1 or 2 of those gotchas is maybe okay. If you get more than that, then it becomes a problem. And I think we're at the point right now where like when they add more, if they were to add any more, it would be a problem.
I think in general, any of those out of nowhere hidden information things have to be treated with a lot of very deliberate caution. This is one of the things I admired so much about the Khans of Tarkir draft format, is that all of the creatures that you could morph face down, they had various mana costs to flip them face up, but consistently across the designs within that draft environment, the ones that could flip face up mid-battle and destroy another morph creature, another 2/2, had a mana threshold of 5 or more.
Yeah.
So you could safely know if your opponent has a certain amount of mana, whether or not your morph creature will be safe, even though you have no idea what it is. It could be dozens upon dozens of various cards. Those are some metrics that it's nice to have signals for other players to be able to work around or be able to bluff around as well, because that is another, it's a railroad.
Guardrail?
Yeah. It is a hard line that other players can learn to expect and therefore cause other mind games with players. And that actually creates more enriched gameplay compared to a Yu-Gi-Oh player put one of 8,000 different trap cards face down and you have no idea what it could be.
Right.
One of those is a little bit too much and it causes analysis paralysis, and having a couple of guidelines on those things, a couple of soft rules there, does actually create a lot more strategy by having those things known between players.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it makes for, I think, a more interesting game when the person might have that counterplay, but you can, in your head, if you're really thinking things through, you're like, okay, I know what the worst case scenario kind of here is, and you can math that out in your head. Once I think it's kind of unhealthy to remove the ability to maybe have someone do that math. Now, I did specify like good free counter spells, because on the other hand, I feel like if you get someone with a thwart or a foil or something, that's maybe okay too, because they're not like that powerful, and it's such a specific thing that, like, if you want to go all in to get someone with a thwart for a free counterspell, that feels much better than like a Fierce Guardianship where the sacrifice you're making to cast it is pretty minimal to get that free Fierce Guardianship.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that the world is like a little bit better with more obscuring hazes compared to more fierce guardianships, a fog instead of a counterspell. So the various types of effects that exist on free spells. But even then, as a general category, Dana, I think you're totally a winner with free spells are the kind of thing that could really get messy the more and more that area expands. So keeping a tight lid on that one seems like the best and most reasonable approach for design going forward, and to make sure that players can have the best time possible. But it is interesting to note over the course of this episode, we've named just a couple of types of things where there are so many options to choose from. And frankly, I think we missed out on plenty of other examples of this as well.
Yes.
So listeners, you've got to let us know about what types of other designs you think are oversaturated.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to hear what folks think of this, because Dana, this is a fascinating concept. Thank you so much for bringing this one forward. I had a lot of fun going over these various examples. It's an interesting trend to notice about the growth of the format.
And a thing I'd really love to hear from listeners is also, which ones of these do you think are unsafe as well? We talked about the ones where we don't want to hit a saturation point. I'd especially love to hear more about that, if there's anything we missed there of the kind of danger areas.
Yes, totally. This is a really interesting thing to notice about the trends going on in the format, Dana. So thank you so much for bringing this topic forward. I love talking about it. Listeners, we are really excited to hear from you about this too. But for now, Dana, I think we got to call this episode to a close. So if our listeners want to get in touch with us, where is it that they can find you online?
You can find me online, usually on Blue Sky at Dana Roach. I'm writing articles for EDHREC, and you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And you can find me everywhere online, from Instagram to Blue Sky at Joseph M. Schultz. And you can find the cast online at EDHRECast. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.